So you're going to name a bunch of joints in this unit, and a couple of them really simple, like your hip joint. But most of them are going to be named for the bones involved in the joint. And we're going to use that same word-o-word construction that we've been using to smush anatomical terms together to make a long word. In this case, the first word is going to be the less mobile of the bone or the marking that it attaches to. So in the example of the temporal bone and the mandible, temporo, you're going to take the adjectival form of temporal, and take off the end, change it to O, and then use the adjectival form of the second bone, the more mobile bone. In the arms and legs, it's also going to be proximal and then distal, if that helps more. So same thing, temporomandibular. The only exceptions to bone/bone are things like glenohumeral. So the humerus going into the scapula goes, of course, into the glenoid cavity. So there we use the name of that glenoid cavity, glenohumeral. That's the shoulder joint. One other is the axis. The atlas, of course, is called, wow, I really shouldn't try to write on the screen, should I? All right, the atlas, the adjectival form becomes atlanto. And so the joint between the occipital bone, the occipital condyles, and the atlas is the occipito-atlantal joint. And between the atlas and the axis, it's the atlantoaxial joint. Okay, so that's one of the exceptions to that rule. Just a weird adjectival form of atlas. Now let's talk about the different kinds of joints. Joints are all the synovial joints are going to be categorized by the way that they move. A hinge joint moves back and forth in one plane like a hinge. The humero-ulnar joint is a hinge joint. The femorotibial joint in your knee is a hinge joint. Plane joints are where the lateral sides of bones, usually the lateral sides of bones, move against each other, and they can move side to side along a certain plane. The intercarpal joints, the intertarsal joints, these are all plane joints. So we have smooth surfaces moving back and forth or left and right across that plane of movement. Saddle joints are kind of a weird connection where both bones have a concave and a convex surface, and so they enable movement in more than one direction. The carpometacarpal joint number 1 for the thumb is an example of a saddle joint. So that's between your the wrist and the metacarpal of your thumb. Condylar joints, also called ellipsoid joints. One surface is convex and the other is concave. You can usually get 2 kinds of movement out of them, back and forth and side to side. So all of your metacarpophalangeal joints between, say, the palm of your hands and your fingers, those are all condylar joints. Some of your other joints that we think of as condyles, like the joints within your fingers, your interphalangeal joints, those are actually hinge joints. So just because it has the name condyle doesn't mean it actually applies to your knuckles. Why? Because anatomy hates us, of course. A pivot joint, pivots, I know, hard to imagine. The atlantoaxial joint is a pivot joint. The radio-ulnar joint, the radius turns around an axis, which is not actually on the ulna, it's actually on the humerus, but that's still, the radius itself is pivoting in that joint. And a ball and socket joint is just what it sounds like. A rounded ball head of one bone fits into a cup on another bone, the glenohumeral joint and the hip joint, where the head of the femur goes into the os coxae bone. Both of those are ball and socket joints, and they provide a wide range of motion on a number of planes. Next section, we're going to talk about a few of the specific joints in the body and what you need to know about those joints and how to recognize them.